Hello, listeners. Welcome to CapitalH. This is David Mallon, your host, Managing Director in our Human Capital Practice and Chief Analyst for our Insights to Action research team. Today, we have a treat for you. We're going to talk to Mike Bollinger. He's Vice President of Strategic Initiatives at Cornerstone OnDemand. We're going to talk about a topic that many of you who are longtime listeners will know is near and dear to me, and that is enduring human capabilities, human skills, the curiosity, empathy, divergent thinking, those skills which are inherent in all of us, maybe more or less practiced in some, but they're the force multipliers. They're the things that separate the high performing from the rest. They're the potentials that we all need to adapt in today's world. And the thing is, they're in higher demand than ever. So Mike and I are going to talk about how organizations can adapt to meet the growing workforce needs of today's world, today's age of AI and automation and so forth, by leaning into and growing those human skills. He's going to share with us insights and data from a report they've just done, their 2024 Global State of the Skills Economy. He's going to talk about how organizations can cultivate human skills. We'll talk a little bit about how generational differences are playing out on these questions. And we'll look at key trends on other in-demand skills like data and sustainability skills in the green economy. So stay tuned. After the break, we'll hear from Mike and I. Introduce yourself. Tell us who you are.
Mike Bollinger, Global VP of Strategic Initiatives at Cornerstone. Been in the industry a while, David. I've known you for a long time in a variety of different roles. And the last couple of years, I worked directly for our Chief Product Officer, but I've also worked in a research capacity at Cornerstone, and really proud of the research we're going to talk about today.
Yes, thank you. And always a pleasure just to have a chance to chat with you. So we're going to do it for the benefit of our listeners today. Let's dig into this research that you have recently published on the global state of skills. First off, what's the report? We'll go from there.
Sure. So one of the things that was really unique about Cornerstone, and in the last year, for those that are industry observers, we acquired a company by the name of SkyHive. And SkyHive has a significant longitudinal year-over-year data set of labor market data globally. And one of the things that we wanted to do, amongst other things associated with that, was we wanted to take that labor market data, we call it LMI, we wanted to take that labor market data and create a longitudinal study. And so what we did with this was we looked at it from 2019 over 2023. So to me, it's the largest longitudinal study globally that has ever been done on this. And it actually compares it two directions. There's a demand side. In other words, that comes from data sourced from a variety of different perspectives, whether it be government or businesses and postings and those kinds of things. And then also the supply source, which is, if you think about it, part of the resume and what individuals are talking about in terms of their own representation of their own skill set. You put those two things together, demand and supply, which are non-human terms, and we'll come back to that. But that gives you a really good view into the notion of what one of the biggest questions I hear from people, which is, how do I know what's coming next? How do I know what's in demand? How do I know what's rising? And employees think the same thing as well. So the basis, if you will, of this was to look at those critical skills, how that would be different in 2025, but also to look at it in terms of what's increasing and what's not and why.
I can only imagine, as we would step back and sort of look at the overall shifts in supply and demand in skills right now, that it would take us in the direction of artificial intelligence. The first time we'll use those words, probably not the last. We know that technologies like AI and AI specifically are having, even if it's still early, a transformative impact on organizations, on their workforces, and on ultimately the skills of those workers. The report suggests, though, that we might need to unpack a little bit about the skills impact and not just focus on the things that I would say almost sort of easy to look at, the technical skills of AI, Python, and other sorts of engineering, but to look at then the human skills, we call them like enduring human capabilities, curiosity, empathy, communications, et cetera, that these are actually rising in demand as much as those technical skills and may not be necessarily getting the attention they deserve. Why do you think these skills are so critical even in this age of AI and automation?
Look, let's acknowledge that the technical skills, if you will, or the functional skills, in some cases, if you're in a technical role, like data analytics and AI machine learning or Gen AI postings, those are all increasing. Absolutely no doubt about that. And significantly, Gen AI job postings have surged 411% over a 2019 to 2020, late 2023 analysis. You would expect that. Things like AR and VR, 155%, data analytics skills, 50%. So you would expect that. But the surprising thing, to your point, David, is that the human skills, and what we would call, as some people call them soft skills, we say human, as does Deloitte, communication and all those other kinds of innovative, genuine curiosity and so on, they're in demand, depending on the country, 2.6 to 3 times more than the digital skills, despite that surge in the posting requirements. I think there's a couple of reasons behind that. And the first one is the notion of bridgeable skills. That's the first thing. And I always use this example. Natural language processing. A lot of people see that as a technical skill, but you know who's good at that are marketing people. And so human skills are the same way, in the sense the human skills that we think about when it comes to are those kinds of enduring skills, if you will, evergreen kinds of skills that are necessary as you learn and unlearn, as Alvin Toffler said years ago. It's those who can unlearn and relearn that are actually going to be productive moving forward. It's those human skills that actually allow you to adapt and adjust to the technology remit that we find ourselves in, because that's always changing.
We've done past work on, as we call them, enduring human capabilities, but human skills, they're the sort of force multipliers. They are the intermediaries. They are how you bring those functional and technical skills to bear to actually solve a problem. And to your point, to adapt how you use that functional skill across contexts. So the first time you use that new Python skill you just developed in one context, to be able to then figure out what's different about the next one and to be successful, it's those human skills that are letting you do it. So it's why they're so essential. How do organizations build and develop them? How do you cultivate them to ensure that you have that adaptability?
One of the things that was interesting in the report was some of the generational differences. And again, we're talking about what people represent as their skill set on their postings. And in the younger generations, the Gen Y, the Gen Zs, because of what they've been told about technical, that was represented much more so on those kinds of resumes than, say, the older generations, up to as much as a 20% discrepancy. So the first thing you have to be mindful of is that there's some generational differences on how you develop that. And there's a number of things that you can do when you think about how do I develop those human skills. And a lot of it has to do with workshops or public speaking training. I remember years ago, I'm going to date myself here, David, but my uncle was had a significant presence in Toastmasters. And I learned how to speak through Toastmasters, as an example. If you do role playing, AR, VR can help with that. Obviously, mentorship and coaching. How do you pair experienced employees and then talk to each other, and not just through digital tools themselves, but rather talk in a safe space? That's part of it. One of the other pieces of research we did around cross-functional projects, and I would call them gig assignments and team building activities, we found that high-performing organizations use that as a development technique. And of course, at the end of it, one of the things that we do is we think about managers as our multiplier effect, first level, second level managers. And by default, there's a talent hoarding behavior that sometimes we see there. So you want to create rewards that help develop that as well. And I know that there's an expectation on that. Your own research in your workplace skills survey said that 87% of the folks see human skills like adaptability as integral to their career, but they don't necessarily feel like their company's making that investment. If we think about that investment in those development techniques, a lot of the development techniques can be augmented by technology, but it goes back to the human-to-human connection, in my opinion. I don't know about you.
I agree. So much of what you just listed off as different things in last year's Global Human Capital Trends study, we focused on a trend which we call the imagination deficit. And it was specifically on this topic of human skills or enduring human capabilities. But particularly through the lens of this conversation we're having, if we look at how technologies like AI are changing work, and quite frankly, if you look at the discourse that we're having in the marketplace right now around how fast AI is moving, there's already kind of a slight thread of disillusionment that maybe to the business leaders who are investing in it, that it's maybe not quite showing the returns fast enough or as expected. That part of that challenge is how we're bringing these technologies to bear. It can't look like how we have introduced new technologies to the workforce in the past. This is not going to be another instance where we can, we've got this great new platform or this great new collaboration tool or what have you, so we're just going to throw it in and expect that it's going to show great returns. In order for AI to really show its value, you actually have to do a little bit of R&D in each part of the work to change the work, to figure out how the work is going to be new and different. To go faster, you actually need not just a small group of people in your organization thinking about this question. You need every person in your organization thinking about this question. You need every worker expressing a little bit of imagination as to how these tools can change their work in fundamental and extraordinary ways. But where does imagination come from? It's something that's inherent in all of us, but those that practice it, that get on the bike every day and the treadmill of curiosity and empathy, and they kind of engage with their world, they're better at using it. Everything you just described is really about scaling, and in an industrial scale way, and scaling and operationalizing how companies invest in and lean into those human skills. And what our point in the chapter was, those organizations that do that investment, that operationalizing, then their workforces will have, broadly speaking, the imagination necessary to not just think about how their current job will change, but funny thing, when all the jobs already that have already been impacted with AI, what defines those jobs on the other side? They're now, most of the mundane and the procedural has gone away. What's left is those human skills. What's left is the adaptability, the curiosity, the et cetera. That becomes even more a portion of the work. So if you don't do what you just described, if you don't operationalize and scale your investment in those human skills, you will face a deficit that prevents both kind of like the first movements now, but also sets you up to fail into the future. You also, though, raised this notion of a difference with generations. Mm-hmm. That was also in your report, that there are, not surprising, patterns in labor participation, patterns in how these different generations are approaching the challenges of the workforce today. Baby boomers retiring, maybe not quite as fast as we imagined. Gen Z entering the workforce. How are we seeing shifts in labor force participation? What challenges is this already creating for your clients, our clients, HR, and beyond?
So interesting. By the way, I love the imagination deficit. That's such a powerful set of terms, and it encompasses a lot of what we're talking about here. So that's a keeper. When we think about it from a generational perspective, and we've always heard about 5 generations in the workplace and how you want to be able to adapt and adjust and those kinds of things. And then you'll have stereotypes like younger people don't communicate well or older people can't handle the technology as well. And the stereotypical approach to this is, in my mind, flawed. And here's why. The idea that you have to adapt and adjust and personalize based on the individual, that's not necessarily generational based. It has some merit, obviously, but it's more based on what we're being told as individual employees and what we expect. If you think about a workforce readiness gap, it's actually composed of 3 things. It's composed of, I call it have, want, need, but visibility. What do I know about what I have? What do I think I need, which is what this labor market report tries to help people do, look around corners. But then what do the employees want? So if I can present my opportunities and my own workforce needs to employees that can then self-select in, that becomes the mechanism by which you build those bridges at a personalized level across all those generations. And so we know know that the perception gap of being able to do that is something that companies aren't necessarily thinking of. Don't take that peanut butter approach. And here's where AI can truly help. Use AI to personalize, to adapt, to adjust, and leverage the strengths of both. And so I think one of the things that we see from a generational perspective is that, particularly in the younger generations, they've been told that if you don't have good technical skills, you won't get a job. And so they've over-rotated on that for themselves with strengths. Don't get me wrong there, but they've over-rotated on that, and that's what they represent. I don't know that necessarily it's because they lack them. I think it's the way that they've been coached to represent themselves. I find when I do workshops with people of varying age groups, there's far more commonality than there is differences. Focus on that, I think, is the first thing I would advise.
Makes absolute sense. It's not so much that there's differences in the skill. It's, are we asking the right questions? I guess is the way I put it. Okay, so there's so much good stuff in this report. We could spend a lot of time on any other various different things that you found. There's a couple that I'd want to poke on specifically. One is some of the other, besides AI, some of the other kinds of skills that are rising in need, rising in kind of conversations around the world. And let's poke on sustainability specifically. The demand for green skills on the rise. How are companies thinking about sustainability practices in the context of workforce planning, workforce strategies, how they answer this question?
So a couple of things to think about when it comes to green skills. And the report found that there's a demand, a huge increase of 76% globally in green skills. Part of that is actually represented in some ways a lot in Europe. And part of that has to do with the fact that there's sustainability reporting. There's a sunshine in what it is that they represent. And so you're starting to see that then come back into the workforce from a demand perspective. But then that's the following question, which is, what kind of demand? How do you build some of those green skills? You have to set clear ESG goals around that. When you look at what the green skills are, there are certifications, there are training programs. You got to think about the circular economy. The recycle is what we call the circular economy. And one of the biggies, and it's something that we do at Cornerstone, is partner with, we call it B2G2C, or educational institutions and NGOs around internships and apprentices. So if you think about the transparent reporting, and you think about the skill sets that go with sustainability types of technologies, you want to align yourself to standards. I think there's something known as GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative, but there's a keen sense of interest when you talk to people from an internship and an apprenticeship perspective, because the notion of green skills have a lot of technology associated with them, but they also have a mission associated with them. So what you need to do is focus on the data-driven decision-making part of the green skills, be very clear in your businesses, and then partner with the external communities to start building that pipeline for yourself.
So in your answer there, that partnership, I'm not remembering exactly the letters you've used there, but the connections to not just, in this case, the supply and the demand, but the institutions, the educational institutions and otherwise that are sort of involved in the skills that workers bring, and then obviously what the organizations get. I suspect that's also going to be part of another question I want to answer, which is when we think about, this one has been up top of the list for a little while now, which is data analytics skills. You also showed substantial growth there, not surprising. And it tracks, I'm sure, to some degree with AI, and probably tracks to some degree with the green skills notion and the measurements and the analytics and so forth that we need there too.
Absolutely does.
So let's take that then as a path to wrapping up today's chat. Based on the insights from your Global State of the Skills Economy report, those B2G2C partnerships or otherwise, what are the top actions you've come away with thinking that organizations need to stay competitive with their skills of their workforce?
If we think about where the impact of Gen AI is going to hit, that's the first thing. You're going to see it hit content creation, and you're going to see it hit things like programming and visualizations and so on. So the first thing is identify where within your business the use cases. I mean, in your introduction, you talked a little bit about the fact that there's a little disillusionment with Gen AI because the use cases have not been specific enough. And so the return hasn't been specific enough. Focus on those use cases and then work from there. That's one. The second one is understand that your extended market is going to be people who aren't going to stay with you for 10 years. But if you can get them to stay with you for a couple of more, 5 rather than 3, that's an advantage as well. And then I think the last thing that I would talk about is recognize that those technical skills matter, but realize that at the end of the day, if you can't communicate the results of those technical skills, if you can't understand as an employee what it is that connects to the overall business, those are the skills that you want to invest in. And I'll make one last point, which is it's about adoption too and change management. And I always joke, you can't manage change, you can only facilitate it. But recognize that what's happening in this absolute noise that we're getting as employees, change is about grief. And so some folks in our communities at this moment are still afraid or feeling like they're being left behind. And so you want to help them through. Everybody goes through that curve. You want to help them through and help them visualize what it looks like on the other side. It's that positivity. I mean, David, this is the best time in the world to be alive and to be in HR for that matter. But you have to realize and focus on that. And once you celebrate some of those things, people will come along.
I love that. What it makes me think about is we've paid attention to just the general world of career development, which is not really a topic for our talk today, but in a way, that's what you're getting at is through the other. Mm-hmm. From the worker's point of view, this is really all about career, is that organizations, I think, historically have thought their role in career was to provide upskilling, provide content, provide training, provide essentially the things that the worker can take and consume and engage in and so on. And that's useful up to a point, but it's not sufficient. It misses you need to engage the worker to understand their aspirations. You need to engage the worker to understand what their dreams are, where they might want to go. And more to the point, you need to give them guidance. You need to give them some notion of the implications of the choices. Don't just give them content training to take part in. Give them that nudge to say, this path is going to be more valuable to us. Choose to go down this path over that one. Or if you engage in this opportunity, this is how it's going to set you up for a kind of a future that's beneficial for you and us as an organization. That providing that insight and guidance is almost to some degree even more important than providing, of course, provide the opportunities, the training, et cetera, but that advice and guidance is just invaluable.
Actually, in a companion piece of our research that we did last year, that visibility is important. One of the things that we found is that the average individual would rather go explore some of that themselves first before they had that conversation with their manager and their leader, but very significant. So the opportunity to go and look and experiment and look at potential opportunities for yourself, presented obviously in context with what the business needs, then you come to your manager with some ideas and can have the conversation that you outlined. It creates both context, it creates a targeted type of conversation, and candidly, it frees up. I mean, right now, one of the things we say to our managers is be a career coach. It's a lot easier for the manager to be a career coach if I'm coming to that person with some ideas around what I want to do. And so there's an opportunity for us to use technology to represent those things before they have that kind of a development conversation, then guided from there. So it's an excellent point.
Makes sense. Prompts to at least get you thinking. Yeah. Yep. That'll do for today's episode of Capital H. Thank you, listener, for joining us. We had a chance to spend some time with a friend, Mike Bollinger from Cornerstone, on their Global State of the Skills Economy report and what it says about how organizations can react and respond to today's AI-enabled world, specifically leaning into those enduring capabilities, those human skills, which are part of how we adapt. Thank you again. Do be sure to like and subscribe wherever you find us. Share your feedback with us on social media. We'd love to hear from you. And of course, we'd love to see you next time as we explore topics and trends and how we make work better for humans and humans better at work. Till next time. This podcast is produced by Deloitte. The views and opinions expressed by podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Deloitte. This podcast provides general information only and is not intended to constitute advice or services of any kind. For additional information about Deloitte, please go to deloitte.com/about.